Okay, the first thing for doing quantitative inoculation of roots is to get a balance. So I'm coming here to actually take the this particular balance, which will turn it off and unplug it and so forth, and we're going to be resetting this thing back up in the let's see, get it to go off here. There we go. So I'll be taking it in, setting it up and wiping it down in the hood where we'll actually be cutting the roots. Okay, what I'm up to right now, I'm actually in the plant hood. We're doing really a training session here, so it's not super critical. I normally would have taken this thing completely apart and washed it down in another location, which you can see the reason why by looking at the crud that is actually on this. In fact, now that I see how much crud is on it, unfortunately I think we are going to have to go take it and gently wipe this down and wash it up in a sink area, and then we'll bring it back here and go ahead and set it up. Cleaning up a balance is non-trivial, but as you can see, it doesn't happen as often as it probably should. I'm going to first try to get rid of the residual that's here of the dry chemicals before I certainly get any water near it. Some of that's likely to be things like sodium hydroxide and such that are much more corrosive when they have water added. So I don't have compressed air in this lab, so it's not unfortunately an option. It's not easily handy on the bench top. What I'm going to do here, if you hold this for a second. This also serves somewhat to clean it up relative to being in the aseptic environment of the hood. I may take this. Unfortunately, it doesn't come apart any further than this. I have done much more extensive cleaning, and I'll have to send out a lab nastygram on not getting chemicals on this. I'm going to go ahead, we have it here, and try to generally clean it off this, and then you can go ahead and put this back right in the hood. Let me a little bit there in the space bar. It's where a lot of powder and crap has a tendency to accumulate. I can see I'm going to need to take this thing and give it a better cleaning later. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead, take that. And where are the pieces? Yeah, these here are just going to be, they're submersible, so to speak. So I'm just simply going to rinse those off. And like to clean them also then with the distilled water. And what I would normally do is I would briefly put these in the actually over in the drying oven. So I'm going to take these. We don't immediately need these, as we are going to cut up the tissue, but we do want them to be dry, and so I'm going to set these inside the drying oven here, and in about 10 minutes we can retrieve those and reassemble them onto the unit in the hood. An important part about thinking about how this is setting up is thinking mentally through the actual process in which we're going to do that. We're going to get a scalpel, put it on that was an autoclave scalpel blade handle here. Doesn't have a blade on it. We'll pick that up in a minute. We'll be sectioning this, pulling that out, putting that into actually petri dishes, which have been autoclaved in this canister. These are glass petri dishes. And we can, it's actually reasonably stable. And from there we'll be using the scalpel to section it up, and then blotting off the excess liquid based on paper towels that have been cut that will fit inside an additional one for blotting, as you'll see. And then we're doing the weighing here. So I'm going to also get, well, sometimes I would do the cutting on an actual plastic petri dish if I'm worried about dulling the actual blade here. So I'll pick those up just in case I need them. I'm going here. And so in here we normally have sterile petri dishes, but we certainly have scalpels that we need. The blades here. It does not look like we have any sterile petri dishes. Looking around here very quick. So we're going to have to dig up some of those here in a minute. What I'm going to do here is actually set up the balance in the hood. And to do that, don't like to spray a lot, get water on or alcohol on things, but certainly having them, especially the surfaces that'll be up towards the tissue that we're working with. I'm just going to try to clean these off a little bit more. And the balance itself, is assembled. The key aspect of this, if you look over the top of this thing, is on the back side of this there's a bubble balance, and it's a little bit of a video game to try to change the legs in such a way that you can do that. So up front here there are little screw legs, and those screw legs then can be turned in such a way that you center the bulb. You may not be able to see it at the moment, but what you won't be able to see is after it's done, that ball is actually centered in there, and the balance therefore is actually leveled. At that point you actually turn the balance on. Because it's a laminar flow hood, there's some turbulence and so forth in that. The way you set up the actual balance is it has a if you take this and you hold down, you'll see it goes through calibration, ASD1. Change that to ASD3. That's basically a stabilization time. That's the maximum. And I'm going to go back through, and there's ASD3 and integration time of 3. That's the working in the most vibration environment that you have. Other than that, the balance is now set up in the hood, and we'll be doing the weighing of the tissue in the hood. Sometimes when you put a petri dish or something on there, it won't actually tear anymore, and so you may have to be prepared to actually make the measurements by difference. So what I'm going to do next is, we have a sand bath over here that is actually where we can be placing things like the tweezers. 10 seconds in there at 270 degrees Celsius is enough to sterilize those. And I'm going to go ahead and place a scalpel on. Careful to note the orientation of the blade relative to the handle. And so you can see that these two snap together, and do that in such a way that as it goes on, of course, it doesn't move. And remember that there is a razor knife in there, so you don't want to stick that in your hand. These have now been in plenty long, and I'm going to give them a chance to cool off. And so we now have a sterile scalpel. I had run the scalpel through the autoclave before that, so it should be relatively sterile. And the reason for that is that we open up our flask here and take out the root tissue. we're going to be reaching down in here and actually quarter sectioning this with the scalpel. So you want to keep your fingers down pretty far in this because you don't want to be in the flask any further than the blade itself. And what I'm going to do here is chop down through here, and then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And so I've actually sectioned this into 4 pieces, in large part, so I can actually get them out of here. There's going to be some sugar and so forth, and one key aspect is just to rinse off the sugar. We don't want that laying around when we're working. This was also autoclaved, and note that I'm using the tweezers is pretty far back on here. I'm not getting my fingers up towards that because I want to be able to get in there, and again, not be touching anything that goes inside the flask. And so at this point, I need a landing place for the roots. And so I can go into here now, and I can go ahead and pull out one of the sections of roots that I had cut. This particular variety is chicory, and I should have cut that a little better. So you can see it's very dense. This is actually a 3-week-old culture. I would often do this with 2 weeks, but honestly it doesn't look that much different at 2 weeks. And the key aspect to this is that I'm now going to take it and systematically chop it up into lengths that are small enough that they'll be sort of the suspension of root particles that we have later. So I'm going to go ahead and take this thing, kind of hold on to it, and then you can see there cut the better part of probably a little less than 1 centimeter. And I'm just using this scalpel is very sharp, and it literally just cuts through there like nothing. And by taking segments like this, I'm functionally making a lot of pieces of root that are roughly just under 1 centimeter in size. What you're not doing is cutting down on that there, but what you're doing is holding it in place, and then pulling this scalpel alongside it. So it's, if anything, only the very, very tip is touching. That way you're not dulling the blade by trying to cut on an actual surface. At this point then I kind of would take this mess and I tease it apart. There's a hunk like that that's a little bigger than what I want. I just go ahead and chop it. At this point, it looks like most of the pieces are small, and it would be more effective at this point to work with another tweezers. So I'm going to use these guys, and I'm literally, if you do that, it goes back in the oven. And I'll put those back in there again for 10 seconds. And all I want to do here is tease this apart. These are going to be a little bit hot. Sometimes if there's a little bit of water in the bottom of the culture, you can actually use that to touch it and cool them off. Again, get used to the idea of staying way down on the tweezers and try not to drop them. All I'm going to do here now is just literally start on one side and pull the tissue to the other side, kind of like, well, I don't know what it's like, separating your spaghetti. And you know what I'm doing is again making pieces of root that will then be suspendable, if you will. I used to do this frequently enough I could roughly tell you what half a gram would look like, but it would be about what's on this side of the petri dish right now. Normally when you'd be doing a quantitative inoculation, the whole point of this would be to have consistency in terms of random material. You don't want too much of the top or the bottom, what was submerged in the culture. And so by doing that quartering and then by pulling it apart, I'm kind of doing a bit of a mixing, if you will, of the tissue. And this particular one is a very dense kind of calyce type. Different root cultures look differently, but the process is pretty much the same. You want to have a little bit of root coleslaw by the time you're done here. And the point is that we don't want to weigh that like that, because we're just going to use these again, so I'm not going to clean them. We want to really have it be a fresh weight but not a soaking wet weight. And so what we're going to do now is take about a couple pieces of paper here. Looks like roughly 3. That's fine. I want a good base to work with, and then I would be moving over roughly the amount that I'm anticipating that I would be blotting off. Okay, and so here is if anything, you'd want to use a little bit more than having to kind of piecemeal it together in the end. But that's probably going to be actually close to about a gram of roots. I don't want these guys to dry out. Play that game. Our goal here then is to literally come up with a weight of roots, and like I said, it may or may not tear. And sometimes if you're persistent, see, it's trying to figure out whether there's too much vibration right now to actually go, but it did tear. That makes it nice and easy. If not, you'd have to do it in your head with a little bit. And so then what I'm going to do is literally put another 2 or 3 of these on top. One aspect of working aseptically in the hood, again, is you try to keep away from the edges of these plates. I tend to handle them as best I can from the top and the bottom like this. And notice that this edge here is still going to be maintained sterilely as long as I don't get my fingers on the edge. What I'm going to do now is just kind of push down on that a little bit. And then I'm going to take this kind of root sandwich, I'll flip it over, and I'll be able to take the top piece off. And this, I would normally have something in the hood to throw my trash, which I don't at the moment, so I'll just throw it over here for the moment. Then spread this out again. You'll notice that now it no longer looks soaking wet, and it's going to be more of a fresh weight then that represents the water content that is inside the tissue is really what we're after. So just one more shot at this will be adequate. In terms of blotting it, that's the whole goal here. So that we're not working with a wet weight. Now you can tell that the tissue goes through quite a bit of abuse here, but the nice thing about it is it can reinitiate meristems all along the cut pieces of the root. Therefore, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you want these to rapidly take off and grow, they're probably going to lag for a day or two. I might simply then take my weighed material and place it into a liquid suspension culture in a normal flask, like the one you see over here, and then use all of that tissue going into my inoculum, not worrying about reweighing it at that time. So I have the weight that I have a sterile dish that's here, and I'll hit the tare again just to see if that'll behave, and it is working exceptionally, surprisingly well. It is literally nothing more now than putting the tissue inside there. And let's say we were going for a weight of 0.5 gram, which may well be what you want in the co-culture flask we're going to do. It's not unusual if I see some of those big hunkers like that to think that's not as effective, you'll know. And so I may selectively take out some of the big chunks and replace it with some other smaller. This is it. What I'm going for here now is getting this. Now, one of the aspects of this is that the tissue is drying. It's not going to be. You can't sit here and. Being more accurate with dead tissue is not better than being less accurate with not dead tissue. You'll notice then that the weight will continue to go down. I'll go like, okay, boom. That is darn close to 0.5. At that point, I can make a judgment decision to take the material. I may take this and place it in there, because what I'm looking for, of course, is, look, 0.5, and there it is. There's my tissue. I'm taking it off the balance, and then you can stick a piece of tape on it or whatever if you have multiple ones that you're working with. The key, though, is that you really don't want to leave it in this blotted state very long. You'd like to be able to get this as quickly as you can now into media. If I was going to be doing a whole series of these, I would do something like have some media in the hood where I would add a couple mils of media right on top of them right now to keep them happy while I'm working with the rest of the tissue. So that's pretty much the process for doing a quantitative root inoculation.